A few hours ago, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation published a terrifying video of the destruction of a fairly large concentration of enemy forces. According to officials of the Russian Defense Ministry, on January 3, near the settlement of YUNAKIVKA, Sumy region, Russian reconnaissance drones detected a concentration of personnel and heavy equipment of the 82nd Airborne Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Army. In total, the Russian reconnaissance drone counted several hundred enemy soldiers and several dozen units of heavy equipment in the area. Moreover, sources in the Russian military department also confirmed that among these Ukrainian soldiers, there were so-called foreign mercenaries, many of whom were active duty soldiers of the armies of NATO member states. It is reported that the Ukrainian High Military Command and its NATO military advisors plan to transfer these soldiers to the Kursk region, to strengthen the Ukrainian grouping in this Russian region. However, as subsequent events showed, the Ukrainian command and the NATO forces were unable to do so. The footage clearly shows how Ukrainian and NATO soldiers are hiding in a wooded area, convinced that the trees of a dense forest will save them from detection. However, unfortunately for them, the thermal camera of the Russian reconnaissance drone was able to detect an accumulation of enemy forces, even in such a dense forest. Immediately after that, the Russian drone transmitted the exact coordinates of the enemy forces to the combat crew of the Iskander missile system. And just a couple of seconds later, this area was hit by an Iskander-M ballistic missile with a half-ton high-explosive fragmentation warhead. The footage clearly shows how the missile detonates in the air, a few dozen meters above the ground, as a result of which the area of damage has increased significantly. Later, Russian reconnaissance drones confirmed the destruction of 200 enemy soldiers and 30 units of heavy equipment. Thus, the destruction of manpower and equipment of the 82nd Airborne Assault Brigade in the YUNAKIVKA area became the biggest loss of the Ukrainian Army and NATO forces in 2025. However, unfortunately for the West, the losses of NATO forces and the Ukrainian General Staff did not end there. As it turned out, on January 3, two groups of Polish soldiers suffered heavy losses in manpower in the Sudzhansky district of the Kursk region, near the village of Krugelkoy. According to the Russian military, Polish soldiers hid in dugouts near the village of Krugelkoy, and via satellite communications demanded that the Ukrainian command send them a rescue team to evacuate. However, instead of a rescue team, Russian Marines from the elite 155th Brigade of the Pacific Fleet came to the Polish soldiers. It is reported that as a result of a 20-minute shooting battle, all those so-called soldiers of fortune were sent to hell, to Bandera and Hitler. Later, Russian Marines even posted dozens of photos with the corpses of these so-called foreign mercenaries. In general, the situation of the Ukrainian army and NATO forces in the Kursk region continues to deteriorate day by day. A few minutes ago, the Russian military department officially announced that over the past 24 hours, in the Kursk region, the enemy had lost 320 soldiers and 20 units of heavy equipment, including one German Leopard tank. Moreover, near Sudza, Russian soldiers of the group of troops under the designation Sever almost completely destroyed the 95th Separate Assault Brigade of the Ukrainian Army. Simultaneously with this, a group of the so-called French Foreign Legion was also destroyed in the Kursk region. As of January 5, 2025, the death of several so-called mercenaries, including Finnish citizen Alexei Lisander, was officially confirmed. It is reported that this so-called soldier of fortune was eliminated by a Russian sniper in the area of the village of Malaya Laknya. However, over the past 24 hours, the biggest success of the Russian troops was the capture of a high-ranking officer of the Ukrainian army, Pyotr Romashko, who was one of the most experienced commanders of the 95th Separate Assault Brigade. It is worth noting that during the interrogation, this Ukrainian officer confessed that on the personal order of the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Alexander Syrsky, the brigade commander of the 95th Separate Assault Brigade, Lieutenant Colonel Ruslan Maryshev, had been recording all the dead Ukrainian soldiers as missing persons. Moreover, he also burned the corpses of Ukrainian soldiers, so that their relatives would not be able to identify them through photographs. The captive Ukrainian officer noted that all this was done to hide from the public the catastrophic losses of the Ukrainian army in manpower. My dear truth seekers, let me remind you that according to the official statements of the Russian Defense Ministry, as of January 5, 2025, the total losses of the Ukrainian army in the Kursk region amounted to 48,000 soldiers. Moreover, a few days ago, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation Andrei Belousov officially announced that starting from 2022, the Ukrainian army had lost 1 million soldiers killed and wounded. In fairness, it should be noted that even independent monitoring services and Western analytical centers cite similar figures. According to them, the Ukrainian army has lost 940,000 soldiers for all the time fighting. And despite this, the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, continues to blatantly lie, stating that the Ukrainian army has allegedly lost less than 80,000 soldiers and officers since 2022. At the same time, this comedian cannot clearly explain why total mobilization continues in Ukraine, and why there is a catastrophic shortage of manpower on the combat contact line. According to the Security Minister of Donetsk People's Republic, Andrei Pinchuk, Ukraine is losing hundreds of soldiers and 1,000 square kilometers of territory every day. Andrei Pinchuk noted that in the Special Military Operation Zone, Moscow is liberating native Russian lands, and at the same time, the fraternal Ukrainian people, deceived by the West, are dying. The fact that the Ukrainian army has lost 1 million soldiers is a tragedy not only for Ukraine, but also for Russia, as these dead soldiers are our brothers, who were deceived by the West, Security Minister of Donetsk People's Republic Andrei Pinchuk said. At the same time, Andrei Pinchuk expressed confidence that the Kiev regime, led by Volodymyr Zelensky, will not be able to avoid responsibility for their crimes against the Ukrainian people. According to him, after the end of the war, a real hunt will begin for these bastards, and even underground bunkers in Washington and London will not be able to save them from deserved punishment.